to the first Schemes and Stones Vassal Battle Report. So, before we get into the game, a couple of quick disclaimers. The game was completely recreated, so the exact positioning of models in some cases may be slightly off from the actual game. So, just as an FYI, everything worked out in the game. They were using the ores and stuff. I recreated it to make it a cleaner view for you to watch the game. So, some of my positioning may be slightly off of where it should be. That being said, I tried to pay very close attention to the maps and get them really close. The other disclaimer is, since I am going off a recording, I didn't know what they had in their hands. I was able to recreate their hands based on how they cheated cards and such, but there were a couple of cases where I have no idea what was actually the card because I never saw it, especially the last turn where I never saw them discard their cards. So I don't know what their hand was completely. That'll be indicated as a question mark. So if you see those cards with question marks, it's because that never actually got used in the turn, and I don't know exactly what that card was. So without further ado, let's jump into the game. So as you can see, the pool is listed right there with corrupted ley lines. It is standard deployment. Spread them out, sabotage, claim, jump, hidden martyrs, and take prisoner as the schemes. I do not have what schemes the players took listed here. I decided it would be more entertaining for you guys to guess at what they were playing. That being said, if you don't want to play guesswork, you'd rather know ahead of time. If you check the show notes for the video, it'll say what they took and you can follow along that way. So you can do it either way, it's up to you. As far as the list, we have the Outcast player playing Terra with a 1 Soulstone cache. It has Karina in the list, of course, 2 Prospectors, a Scavenger taxed in, a Nothing Beast, Aeonius, and then also Hannah Lovelace taxed in. So that is the Outcast crew. Now for the Bayou crew, we have Zoraida with a 6 Soulstone cache. We have the Lucky Effigy with the Effigy of Fate upgrade on it. We have the Bayou Gator, a Silurid, a Grootslang, the First Mate, and Francois Lacroix as a taxed-in model. So let's actually look at the game state. The Outcast player won, and he was the attacker in this case. So he split his crew into half, and as we see in this first image, he deployed Hannah on the left side. The Prospector is the model that's up front next to the line. And then we have Aeonius and the Nothing Beast a bit farther back. Then, of course, the Bayou player deploys, and we can see it here. So from left to right, we have a Silurid on the far left. We have the Bayou Gator, that's the one that's close to the strap marker there. Then we have Francois. We have Zoraida kind of in the middle, up on the strategy line. Behind her, we have the Lucky Effigy and the Grootslang that are a little bit farther back from the line. And on the right side, we have the First Mate that is on the deployment line. Jumping forward then, we see that the layer markers get deployed immediately after the Grootslang is deployed. We can see he put one right next to the Grootslang, of course one next to the center line, and another one kind of off to the side. So it gives him some options of where he can jump to. Then we have the deployment of the rest of the Outcast crew. So we can see the Scavenger is the center-ish model right next to that 0. Then we have Terra right next to the Prospector. And we have Karina farther off, still on the line of scrimmage, so to speak. So, the next image we see here is the setting of the lodestone. You can see that the Bayou Gator, next to that strap marker on the top left, is the lodestone holder for the Bayou crew. And then Aeonius in the back is the lodestone holder for the Outcast crew. So let the games begin. In this first image, you will notice there are a couple things. First off, the model that is currently activating will be in green. So that's how you can easily note who is going. If it's targeting another model, I will highlight those in other colors to indicate generally it's red or orange if it's like a side effect kind of thing. This should hopefully keep it pretty easy to tell who's going, that sort of thing. So as we can see here, Zoraida is the model that ends up going first. But before we get into that, we get to the initiative flip. As you can see now, the Outcast player's 9 disappears out of his hand. That's because he cheated for initiative. And then he nominated for the Bayou to go first. I think this is primarily because he wanted to out-activate the Bayou crew. So, Zoraida ends up taking her first action and obeying the Grootslang. She does cheat in a card to hit the target number. So, the Grootslang then takes the layer-to-layer action and jumps up to that middle marker to get closer to the enemy crew. Zoraida then uses the Grootslang here to target the Prospector. She is obeying the Prospector through the Grootslang. She ends up cheating the 12 of Mask here to ensorcel, and then the Prospector takes its 2 actions, its first one being to charge Karina. Unfortunately for the Outcast player, the attack succeeds and does 2 damage to Karina. The Prospector then goes again, and as you can see, Karina ends up dying. So then Zoraida takes her bonus action, the Threads of Fate, to discard her hand, and the opponent does so as well, and then they both redraw 6 cards. So you see both hands get refreshed at this point. And of course, as I mentioned, we don't know what that one card is because we never actually see it. I imagine it's a low non-mask, though. So next up, Zoraida ends up obeying Hannah through the Grootslang, and it gets successfully dodged in this case. But because he cheats, Zoraida is able to look at the top card, and this is something that is continually done throughout the game, is Zoraida keeps being able to see that top card, either the Outcast card or her own card, to identify it. That ends up not going through, though, that obey action, and then Zoraida ends her activation and summons the Voodoo Doll right up above her, discarding that 1 of tomes out of her hand. This also gives the Outcast player a pass token, so they both have 1 pass token, I believe it is. So the next activation is on the Outcast side. The Prospector goes, it mines Soulstone to increase the cash to 2 for the Outcast player. It then uses that corpse marker to appraise. He does have to cheat in because he misses the target number, but he is able to flip a 10 of crows for the action. Whenever appraise is taken, you flip another card, and based on what that card is, something happens, as you can see. In this case, he gets to draw a card, and then he spends his last action to drop a scheme marker right next to him. After that, the Bayou player decides to go with the Grootslang. The Grootslang starts by using the ambush action, so it didn't need to discard a card in this case because of the layer marker. It then takes a walk action to get further away because it doesn't want to just end up getting killed because it's a little too far forward. And it ultimately creates another layer marker with its other action, so it can then jump from this point to other locations as needed. The Outcast player then goes. We have Terra activating. Terra ends up starting the round by trying to summon in 2 Void Wretches. Now it is to be noted that these Void Wretches do not start on the table. They start buried, and then they can unbury by ripping off fast of a model on the battlefield. This also gives the Bayou player some more pass tokens, and he is up to 3 pass tokens at this point. Terra then drops a scheme marker, and after dropping the scheme marker, she walks a bit farther forward to get a little closer up the table. The Bayou player then goes. As you can see, the Voodoo Doll takes its activation. All it does is its bonus action served its purpose to kill itself and draw a card. Note that earlier it didn't attach an upgrade because there was nothing in range. Back to the Outcast player. The Outcast player activates the Scavenger. Using tools from the job, it picks up that 12 of tomes that it cheated to do the summoning from Terra and discards of 1 of tomes, so it has a tomes built in on its suits. It then uses Weird Device targeting Hannah to give her focus, and it also declares the trigger that it got from Tools from the Job, the Tome 1, to draw a card. So then he draws another card that gets added to his hand, and then the Scavenger just walks forward, getting closer to the midfield. So next up we have the Lucky Effigy on the Bayou side of things. It just simply takes a concentrate action to get focus. It then uses its bonus action to set up its Luck Aura, which does successfully go off. So at this point, the Outcast player decides to burn its pass token just to make the Bayou player go, but then the Bayou player immediately responds by burning one of its pass tokens. So this forces the Outcast player to still go. He ends up deciding to go with Aeonius. Aeonius then does the Sever Timeline, and it spins a Soul Stone for a crow. This gives him 2 pass tokens, that's why he burnt the stone for the crow. And then it lets him unbury one of these Void Wretches to get them in play. He does his bonus action Stutter Time. He is targeting the Nothing Beast, as you can see. This is just to bury it, to get it farther up the board by unburying it via another action. He then spends his last AP to use TikTok, targeting the Nothing Beast, since he can target buried models. The Nothing Beast relents in this case, and even though he Black Jokers the attack, it's still successful. It ends up doing 2 damage or 1 after incorporeal, but the primary point of attacking that Nothing Beast is to give it fast. So it does 1 damage to it and gives it fast, so when it unburies, it can do an extra action. The Bayou player then responds by spending a pass token, so nothing happens there, and it's back to the Outcast player. The left side Prospector ends up going. It mines Soulstone. Again, it gives back up to a cache of 2 because we burned 1 previously from Aeonius. Then it drops a scheme marker next to it, and then immediately appraises that scheme marker. He ends up flipping the red Joker for the flipped card. And in this case, he can place another scheme marker and draw a card. In this case, he can place an enemy scheme marker, though, which he does so because Prospectors can remove enemy scheme markers to get Soulstones back. We go back to the passing shenanigans. The Bayou player passes again, but now the Outcast player has pass tokens again, so he passes back to the Bayou player. This makes the Bayou player finally go because they're out of pass tokens, and he activates the Gator. The Gator simply just concentrates and walks up next to the strat marker. Not a big surprise there because it's currently holding the lodestone. This goes back to the Outcast player who just activates the Buried Void Wretch, which does nothing. The Bayou player then has to go. He activates Francois. Francois walks forward. He ends up taking a shot at the Scavenger, and it ends up missing. Francois ends up taking 1 damage, though, because the cheated card was that Tome, which does the unmade trigger to ding Francois back. He then decides he doesn't want to be that far forward, so he just ambushes back for future activations. Next up, we have the Void Wretch going. This is the Unburied Void Wretch, so this one is going to use its bonus action to bury Aeonius, and also this is going to throw the lodestone because Aeonius is buried, so it goes to the next closest target, which happens to be that Void Wretch that just buried it. The Void Wretch then just walks up next to that strat marker, and it takes a concentration action and gets ready to score that ley line. Next up, we have the Silurid in the top left corner. It just takes a walk action. It then, of course, leaps. This one hits the red Joker. And then it drops a scheme marker on the opponent's side of the table. So this tosses it to Terra next, who does her second activation. Now, this time she is slow because that's one of Terra's special abilities, the Adrift in Time. She can activate twice. So in this case, she is going to time slip and place forward. He does it again on top of that rock, and then he uses the bonus action Stutter Time to target the Silurid to give it fast. It is successful in this case, so it gives it fast, but the Silurid does get Butterfly Jump and it jumps farther forward. Then the Bayou player decides to activate the First Mate. The First Mate will fail the initial flip for the leap, so he will cheat in the mask so he can make sure to do the leap. He then walks forward, and much like the other Silurid, he places a scheme marker on the opponent's half of the table. He is also able to draw a card from Showboating because he cheated in for the leap. The Nothing Beast pops out now because it has its special ability, which lets it unbury if there's a model with fast. So the Silurid is the fast model there, so it unburies next to that Silurid, and then it's able to take its actions. Its first action is to concentrate. I don't mark it here because it immediately uses it to attack the Silurid, and he ends up smacking it for 4 damage, but the Silurid is able to butterfly jump away from it. As you can see, he charges to follow up after it, and this attack fails. So he's not able to finish off the Silurid, and it once again does its butterfly jump to get farther away. We are out of activations for the Bayou crew. That leaves Hannah. Hannah doesn't do much. She just moves forward a couple of times to get up the table. And that ends the first round. As you can see, the strat markers get claimed at this point, because I feel like brown and yellow are hard to tell. I decided to use red and blue. So the Outcast player's blue, the Bayou player's red. So as you can see, the Gator claims the one in the top left, and the Void Wretch claims the one in the bottom right. And of course, no points or scores. It's turn 1. So on to turn 2, we have the players refilling their hands. In this case, the Outcast player ends up stoning for cards. We end up getting both players cheating for initiative, but the Outcast player ends up going first because he has that extra pass token. Then the Bayou player gains 2 pass tokens because he is down in model count. So the Nothing Beast goes first. It ends up picking that scheme marker there, so he can't score whatever he's trying to score. He then charges the Silurid, and it does successfully connect, and the Silurid is killed, and that is the end of the Nothing Beast's turn. We then go to the Bayou Gator, who ends up walking and ambushing farther forward. It then spends its last AP to throw the Lodestone to the lucky effigy. Next up, we have the Prospector in the bottom left. It mines Soulstone to increase the cash. It then interacts to pick up that scheme marker to get a Soulstone back, so again, gaining another Soulstone immediately, and that's because of its ability. This will fetch a high price. And then it just takes a walk forward next to that strategy marker. Next up, we have Zoraida herself activating. She ends up obeying the Grootslang, who layers to layer to that layer marker there. Zoraida then uses Threads of Fate to redraw their hands. She then targets the Nothing Beast going through the Grootslang and ends up successfully obeying him with the Ensorcel trigger. The Nothing Beast charges Terra there, as you can see. She then cheats in to succeed with the attack and ends up doing 4 damage to Terra, who in turn stones it to 2 damage. Then the Nothing Beast takes its Ensorcel attack against Terra. It misses. She then targets Terra directly with the Poison Fate ability. This is whenever Terra cheats, she'll take damage. Terra flips the red Joker and is able to dodge it. This causes Zoraida to end her activation and summon the Voodoo Doll by discarding a card. Nothing's in range to attach the Curse upgrade to, so it doesn't attach anything. The Scavenger immediately uses tools from the job to pick up that red Joker and discards a crow, so it can add crows to its abilities. It then walks sideways a little bit, and it uses Weird Device on the Wretch with the Lodestone. He ends up giving it Focus and the Burnout trigger to do 2 damage to it, and I think I incorrectly marked it as 1 damage. It's actually 2 damage because it's not an attack action, so that model I think lives throughout the entirety and never gets attacked again. Anyways, it gets fast. So this immediately then jumps back to the Bayou player who just sacrifices the Voodoo Doll for a card. That Void Wretch then goes, the one that was just made fast. It walks twice back towards the midfield, and then it throws the Lodestone to that Prospector that is right next to the strategy marker, and he is done. The Grootslang, seeing the opportunity, then decides to try to kill the Prospector and deny that point. So it ambushes forward. It then charges the Prospector using its Barbed Tongue attack, but the defender is able to cheat high enough to dodge the attack. And the second attack is made, and the defender just flips high enough to dodge the attack. So the Grootslang is unable to do anything. Terra then immediately responds by stuttering time against that Grootslang. The attack ends up missing because the defender cheats. Terra then ends up charging the Grootslang and attacking it once for 2 damage, then attacking it again for 3 damage, and then attacking it for a 3rd time for 2 more damage. So the Grootslang ends up being left with 3 wounds left after Terra takes a bunch of attacks against it. The Bayou player then burns one of its pass tokens. Terra immediately activates, and she once again tries to stutter time on the Grootslang. In this case, it ends up being successful and gives fast to the Grootslang. Terra then concentrates, and she uses the From the Void summoning ability, cheating in that red joker, to summon in a hunter. Now, again, of course, the hunter comes in buried, so it doesn't immediately jump out in play, and the Bayou player gains another pass token. The Bayou player immediately passes its turn, so it's then Aeonius' turn. He immediately unburies, ripping off the fast of the Grootslang. It then uses TikTok against the Grootslang and successfully damages it, doing 2 damage and giving it fast. And then it uses Stutter Time against the Grootslang. Now, this was a bit of misplay because he forgot that he just applied fast. Ends up missing anyways, and it burns a high card out of the Bayou player's deck. He then does the Severed Timeline ability. He ends up failing the actual ability, but because he hit the trigger, and it's not a after succeeding, it's after resolving ability, he ends up getting the pass tokens. So, fails to bring out the hunter, but does get the pass tokens that he wanted. The Bayou player then ends up passing again. The Void Hunter jumps out next to that Grootslang, ripping off fast, of course. And it ends up stuttering time against the Grootslang to give it plus flips for its attacks. It misses the first attack, but its second attack it successfully hits and kills it. Back to Bayou, we have the lucky effigy going. It just double walks next to the marker up there, the leyline marker. It, of course, has the lodestone, so it's going to set up to score. The Outcast player, now having the pass tokens, decides to pass. The Bayou player then activates Francois. Francois ends up just taking a couple of shots against Aeonius. Ends up doing 1 damage because Aeonius ends up soulstoning away to prevent one of the attacks, and I think the other attack just ends up missing. We then have Hannah going. Hannah just walks forward and then drops a marker. Then the Bayou player decides to activate the First Mate. First Mate walks, then soulstoning for a mask in this case, to leaps up next to that lair. And of course he's going to draw a card because he cheated for showboating. And he walks once more close to the middle of the board. Then we have the right Prospector going. It ends up mining Soulstone to get another Soulstone. And it just takes a couple walks through that severe terrain to get a little bit farther forward. The Bayou player is officially out of activation, so he is done for the round. And the Outcast player is pretty much out too, because all he has is a Void Wretch that is buried and doesn't do anything. So that brings us to the end of the round. Both the players end up claiming one of the ley lines, so they both have 2 ley lines. And in this case, the Bayou player reveals 2 of his schemes. He reveals Claim Jump on the First Mate, so he gets a point there as he is close to that middle point. And he also reveals Hidden Martyr on the Grootslang and the Gator. That is why the Gator stayed back and is hiding currently, and the Grootslang charged forward. So that puts us at a score of 3-1 in the Bayou's favor. Let's go on to turn 3. Of course, first thing we see here is just the resetting of the hands. And they both end up flipping. Nobody cheats this time. The Outcast player decides to go first. And the Bayou generates a massive 5 pass tokens because they have a lot of dead models. I should also mention here, this is where the Effigies upgrade comes to play. And it turns into the Emissary. So the first activation, as the Outcast player chose to go first, is Hannah. Hannah, in this case, uses Ancient Word, targeting the First Mates, knowing that he's now worth points. She tries to kill him. The attack does 1 point of damage after a Soulstone prevent, and he does hit Glimpse of the Void trigger, but it is cheated by the First Mate to stay in play, and then of course he butterfly jumps a little bit backwards to get concealment from that layer marker. Hannah then walks in a better position, and she is done. First Mate, sensing that the opponent's going to try to kill him, activates. He ends up walking into a more safe position. He then leaps further away back into his backfield, and then he takes the concentrate action for a future round. The Outcast player then activates that Void Wretch in the middle of the table and just walks it twice, putting it in a potentially more relevant position for future scoring. The Bayou player then activates the Gator, who ends up taking a couple walks and an ambush way back in the back to be safe. Now that the Grootslang is dead, he's just going to go hide in the corner and then try to charge out to engage somebody at the very end to score that second point. The Outcast player then activates Aeonius. Aeonius ends up doing Sever the Timeline to unbury that second Void Wretch that's been buried for a round. He also ends up stoning for Crow to get some more pass tokens, and does so. He then Stutter Times the Nothing Beast to bury it, and does successfully bury it. He then TikToks the Nothing Beast again, ends up dealing 1 damage and giving it fast, so when it pops out, it's ready to do some damage. This is where the pass wars begin. The Bayou end up passing 3 times in a row, and the Outcast player ends up passing its 2 pass tokens that it has. Ultimately, it makes the Outcast player have to go again, though. And the Outcast player ends up going with that Void Wretch that just got unburied. It just ends up double walking up to the left side flank. The Bayou player continues passing, because it's got lots of pass tokens. The Outcast player then has to activate that Prospector with the Lodestone. It ends up walking forward and giving the Lodestone to the Hunter, who can then run it towards the middle as needed. Bayou player, of course, once again passes. Terra ends up time-slipping a couple of times to jump forward. Terra also takes a walk action as well, clearly trying to put some pressure on that top right side of the board. Now that the Bayou player is out of pass tokens, he activates Francois, who just unloads into Aeonius. He's able to do some damage. He ends up doing 5 damage from a moderate wild shot trigger shot. That is why he ends up going down 4. He soulstones to prevent 1. And that's also why Mama Z ends up taking a damage from the wild shot. Terra then ends up going again. She walks twice, getting up to that top right. Uses Stutter Time against the first mate and gives it fast. It does push up forward a little bit next to that strat marker. Then we have the Emissary, probably worried that it's going to get tied down by a Nothing Beast popping out. Now that he has Lodestone, he knows he needs to get out of there, so he does a Steamroller to roll way up the table. And then he does a walking over top of the Prospector and making it take a duel, which it ended up succeeding, and gets next to the strat marker, though, where he wants to be to score. The Nothing Beast then pops out next to that first mate, ripping out fast in the process. He then obliterates the first mate once, and after some stone prevention, it does 3 damage, and he ends up doing a little bit of a walk around the strat marker. This does actually put him where the Nothing Beast can't immediately take an attack action against him. The Nothing Beast ends up charging the Gator up there, because he's now not engaged. And he obliterates the Gator a couple of times and ends up killing it. So that is now 1 point less that is guaranteed not going to be scored from Hidden Martyrs. The Zoraida player then ends up activating Zoraida. Zoraida has to walk forward because all of her targets are a little bit out of range and she doesn't want to deal with the Nothing Beast right now. So she ends up obeying the Hunter, knowing that it has the Lodestone. She also ends up cheating, even though she is successful, because she wants Ensorcel, and she makes it double walk into the corner, so it's not going to be anywhere close to one of the strat markers. She then threads a fate to do some card drawing, and takes her next action to obey Hannah. She ends up cheating the red Joker to succeed. She charges Aeonius with this attack, and she siphons power on herself, hurting herself to take the attack. Ends up missing the attack because the defender cheats high enough. Now, the benefit to this is Mama Z does look at the top card of the Outcast player and ends up chucking a 12 of Rams. That is the end of Zoraida's turn. She ends up summoning the Voodoo Doll, and in this case, the Voodoo Doll does actually have range to a model, and it ends up cursing Aeonius. And then, of course, the Outcast player gets pass took. The Outcast player then activates the Prospector in the bottom right. It mines Soulstone to increase his cash. He then concentrates, and he immediately uses that concentrate and uses Ice Struck Soulstone against the Emissary to yank it away. It needed to do the concentrate also because it had concealment, so that's why he concentrated first. They both burn their focus as well. The Emissary, knowing that this is a big deal, burns it. The attacker, though, cheats in the red joker that he got from that recycling of the hand from Zoraida and yanks it off of the strategy marker, which is a big deal as they now both are off the strategy markers for this round. So the Bayou player then ends up going with the Voodoo Doll. The Voodoo Doll actually does something this round as it walks forward. It charges Francois in this case, who will relent the attack. Now, unfortunately, he ends up hitting moderate damage, so he ends up damaging Francois a little bit more than he was intended. But the primary reason he does this is because he's doing the built-in trigger to damage itself, which in turn damages Aeonius. He then misses the triggered attack because he can't declare a trigger off of it, and he doesn't want to hurt his model. He ends up actually cheating the attack in this case, though, to make sure it misses. This, in turn, goes to the Void Hunter, which walked back to basically where it was before. The Bayou player's out of activations at this point and pass tokens, so it is back to the Outcast player. The Scavenger, it uses tools from the job, picking up that red joker that it previously cheated and never flipped another card on top of it. He discards a 5 of Rams, then takes a walk action to get in a better position. And it does use Weird Device on Aeonius. It fails the flip, ends up having to cheat. And Mama Z once again looks at the top and discards a 13 of Tomes. This isn't as big of a deal because the turn's basically over, but it's just crazy how many Severes that Zoraida ends up seeing from this ability. But he ultimately ends up giving focus to Aeonius and healing him a couple wounds to keep him in the fight. So that ends the round. Nobody ends up claiming any ley lines, but they both get their ley line points because they were a turn ahead. And the score ends up being 4-2, so still a tight game. And we go into turn 4. The Outcast player ends up winning the initiative flip and goes first. The Bayou player generates 5 more pass tokens. The Nothing Beast ends up activating first. It drops a ski marker way in the backfield. It charges the first mate, trying to obliterate it. The attack ends up doing some damage, though. It does get Soulstone reduced a little bit, and the first mate butterfly jumps out of range as well. The first mate, sensing that it is in trouble, it immediately activates. It leaps right next to that marker that just got placed, and then it picks it up. He then concentrates for future use, and since he did cheat, he would have done showboating, but I think I was watching another hand, and he forgot maybe to draw the card, I think, in this case. Moving on, we have the Void Wretch that goes, the left side one. It drops a ski marker and just walks farther into the backfield. Francois then activates. He takes a walk action. He then ambushes, and then he walks again. He doesn't take an action, but he does maintain line of sight to Zoraida, so Zoraida can obey him as needed. We then have the next Void Wretch go, the one in the right side. It ends up walking once and dropping a scheme marker there on mostly the opponent's side of the table. The Voodoo Doll then does its normal activation, where it activates and kills itself to draw a card. Terra then activates. She uses Time Slip to jump forward a bit. She drops a ski marker and then walks towards the first mate, getting ready, trying to finish him off. The Bayou player then starts passing, I believe, the next 5 activations in a row, so it's a bunch of Outcast activations. Terra immediately goes again. This time she is slow because it is her second activation. She drops another ski marker. She positioned so she was just outside of 1 inch in this case, so she could do the drop. She then charges the first mate. The first mate ends up burning focus and does get hit because the red joker is dropped by Terra to try to make sure that happens. Also has glimpse of the void trigger on this because of the red joker. The first mate goes to 1 health and he butterfly jumps away, so he lives for at least another activation. The next model to go is the Prospector there in the bottom leftish. It mines soulstones to increase his cash. He then ends up walking twice and being done. Aeonius walks into a better position, kind of going around Terra. He then tick-tocks the Void Hunter, which relents. He does 2 damage in this case, and he ends up applying fast to the Void Hunter. Hannah then activates. Hannah specifically notes to walk and block line of sight from Zoraida. Then Hannah proceeds to Ancient Word Zoraida and tries to siphon to do Glimpse of the Void, but the attack is dodged by Zoraida. Scavenger walks forward and takes a shotgun shot at Zoraida, but once again misses. Zoraida then activates. She threads a fate to refill their hands. Zoraida then immediately obeys Hannah, trying to get Hannah out of the way. Zoraida ends up hitting a 13 for a massive 20. Hannah does cheat up to prevent the ensorcel trigger because he's banking that he doesn't have a 13 of mass that he's willing to spend. Hannah ends up going with her obey, and I will make a caveat on this. They measured it to make sure that she had a charge lane, and it was perfectly sized. When I went to recreate the game, it was not perfectly lined up. So, yes, there was a charge lane there. As far as the attacks, though, she siphons power for the ram so it can get an extra damage out of it. The attack ends up doing 5 damage, which is enough to kill the Void Hunter, which is very unfortunate for the outcast player, because it throws the stone to Aeonius, who has already gone. Zoraida then obeys Francois, who she can see, and ensorcels him on this one, so he walks and can pick up that scheme marker. Zoraida then has another AP that she can spend, so she tries obeying Aeonius and actually succeeds. He charges Hannah and uses TikTok. Only 2 damage, but slow is probably more important, and puts Aeonius with the lodestone even further out of position. She then, of course, ends her activation, discards a card to summon the voodoo doll, and this time the voodoo doll ends up cursing Hannah. So that voodoo doll ends up immediately going because the outcast player passed. The voodoo doll walks, and it charges the scavenger. It does hit, and ends up doing 1 damage, I think, and declares its trigger to do 1 damage as well to it and Hannah. Then we have the Prospector go. The Prospector mines Soulstone, so it increases his cash. He then does his Dowsing Stick ability that lets him do that micro push, because there's that enemy scheme marker there. It praises the scheme marker and picks it up, and he ends up drawing a card off the flip. He does it again, removing his own scheme marker. In this case, it was a low card, so he draws and discards. So the emissary, seeing that, okay, I'm not going to get yanked again now, so I can activate. He lines up his roll, and he shoots up the table to clear that scheme marker and hits the Prospector in the process, but the Prospector, I think, flips it, so he doesn't take any damage. He then lines up and rolls, and he gets next to that strat point in the middle. And that actually was the last activation of that round. The Bayou player scores the ley lines because he's able to claim a new one. The outcast player does not successfully claim one, so he unfortunately loses a point there. And that is the only point scored on this turn. It is now 5-2 in the Bayou player's favor. So let's go on to turn 5. We recycle the hands here. The Bayou player ends up winning the reflip, and the outcast player doesn't cheat. The Bayou player ends up generating 4 pass tokens because of dead models. And he decides to go with the first mate as his first activation, saying that the first mate is going to die if it does not. So the first mate ends up cheating for the leap, and he then takes a couple of walk actions. The outcast player then goes. He activates that Prospector there in the bottom right. He walks forward and places a marker, and places another marker using Malifaux Mining Law's bonus action, and he cheats in specifically the crow so he can drop the second marker, because that's the trigger, is to just drop a marker. It also makes those schemes hazardous terrain. The emissary ends up going. He ends up lining up his steamroller and rolls over those 2 markers and immediately remove them. He should have taken a damage from that. I forgot to mark it. And the Void Wretch ends up successfully passing the flip. I think he may even cheated it. He then lines up his next one, and he then jumps back down next to that marker. Now that the Prospector is gone, he knows it's like, I should be safe to score this final leyline point. We next have the Void Wretch in the top. It just walks and drops a marker. The Voodoo Doll then ends up going. It just attacks the Scavenger. It misses the attack. The unmade trigger, though, ends up hitting, which does damage to it, which then damages Hannah. The voodoo doll then takes a second attack, targeting it and declaring the trigger so it will kill itself. It ends up dealing 1 damage to the scavenger in this case, and Hannah ends up soulstoning to prevent the damage. Nothing Beast then activates in the top right. It takes a walk action and then charges the first mate using Obliterate and successfully hits and kills the first mate. The Bayou player then opts to pass, so he ends up passing the next several rounds. Outcast player then goes with his Void Wretch on the right, and it just walks and drops a marker. The Prospector then ends up going after that, and it mines Soulstones, and it uses the I've Struck a Soulstone ability on Francois to reposition him. He ends up missing the first attack, actually, but he gets him on the second one, and he's able to drop a scheme marker on that one. We then have Aeonius going after another pass. Aeonius ends up just walking next to the strat marker because he has the lodestone, hoping to score that final point. Tara actually goes, and she ends up triple walking back into a relevant position for later. Bayou player being out of pass tokens finally, and Francois just unloads into Hannah. He ends up hitting the wild shot trigger and ends up hitting the red joker on damage, and he's able to blow her up and kill Hannah in this activation. He missed the first shot, I believe it was, and then the second one hits the red joker and kills her. The outcast player then activates the scavenger. He was trying to get another marker down. Unfortunately, he was not fast enough because of the sphere train, so he ends up just double walking into position. And then we jump back to Zoraida, as Zoraida is trying to obey Aeonius, and he ensorcel obeys him to walk twice to the backfield, so that outcast player is never going to be able to score that final point, as he has no way to get Aeonius back up there. And that is when the game is basically called by the players. They agree that pretty much the points were locked in at this point. The Bayou player claims that strat marker in the bottom right, and I put purple if they both claimed it, just to indicate that they both had that. And he scores that point for the ley line there. The outcast player misses ley lines again. The outcast player does score 2 of his points, though, as he gets 1 point for Sabotage using the swamp. As you can see here, I have the 2 scheme markers marked that he used. And then he uses 3 other scheme markers for Spread Them Out. Those are 3 that he could declare. He could technically declare that other one, too. And he scores his Spread Them Out point. So the game ended up being 6-4 in the Bayou player's favor. The Bayou player, of course, getting 4 leyline points, and then 1 claim jump point and 1 hidden martyrs point. The outcast player getting 2 leyline points, 1 spread them out point, and 1 sabotage point. I'm going to hold my commentary to myself, and I'm going to let you guys discuss. What do you think was played right? What do you think was played wrong? What did you like about the format? What do you think didn't work? Let me know, and I will hopefully make more of these and improve the methods that I'm using to try to make it a little bit more visually appealing, that sort of thing. So until next time, stay safe out there and hopefully get some more Vassal games so I can record them and make battle reports out of them.